Eastern Australia, an environment that has, over time, evolved some extraordinarily unique groups of Homo sapiens. But today, we observe a small tribe akin to a group of meerkats that gather together atop a small mound to watch, question, and discuss the current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Oh, welcome back, dear listener. The Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove podcast, episode 300. Welcome aboard if you're in the chat room. Say hello and make some comments. We'll try and get to you if we can. I, of course, am Trevor, a.k.a. the Iron Fist. With me, as always, Paul, the 12th man.
Greetings, Earthlings.
Shay, the Subversive.
Yes, hello.
Joe, the Tech Guy.
Evening all.
Right. You know what? Let's just jump straight into it. No mucking around. We've got 31 topics on my list to get through. So, yeah, on the list, we're going to talk about the Biloela family. We're going to talk about Israel and Palestine. Oh, a bit about Deliveroo, a bit about Spanish stamps, a bit about Dark Emu, a bit about Friendly Geordies, a whole range of topics. Boris Johnson's marriage, Israel Folau's back, vaccine incentives. There's 1,000 topics there. Let's get into them. Well, the big news, I think, of the last few days has been the Biloela family and how they've been sent off to Christmas Island, and one of the children got very sick, back to Western Australia, and really, you know, there's two sides to the story, isn't there? It seems, on the one hand, there are a group of people who would say we have laws in this country as to who's allowed in and the circumstances under which they're allowed, and these people don't meet the criteria, therefore they should be sent back. And then there's the other group which would say, well, this is a good case for an exception because of various reasons of justice and humanity and fair go. Really, that's sort of the two arguments. Thoughts, panel, on the Biloela family?
Fire away.
After you.
Yeah, well, I just think it's been pretty barbaric, it's been pretty long-winded, and it's been really unnecessary. Mm-hmm. We didn't have to carry on like this, and frankly, I wonder how the international community responds to this, because my experience of serving and taking care of Australians for the past 10 years is that we're a generous, welcoming, considerate bunch. This is not an accurate or adequate representation of Australians. Mm-hmm. And so I think our policies should be kind and benevolent like the Australians I experienced.
Mm-hmm. And
this isn't.
What about the fear of this opening the floodgates to the boats sort of...
Haven't we shown that we will shut international borders? Mm. Are we really still fearful of this threat? Mm. We've shut the world out.
Yes.
So I don't think there's a leg to stand on.
We're pretty good at keeping people out if we put our mind to it.
That's right. Paul, we just stop the planes. We stop the planes and the boats and everything. Yep. So, yeah, yep. I'm not concerned.
Okay. Rather than me provide a contrary opinion just off the top of my head.
Go on. Go ahead, Trevor.
I was doing it to some extent, wasn't
good.
I?
Well, that there's two sides to the story,
so
yes.
What do you think about the contra view?
Like the hard legal argument that they haven't met the criteria and therefore they should be shipped back. Look, you know what? A few years ago, I might have agreed with it, but I've gone soft in recent times. But here's my reasoning.
Yeah.
Well, for a start, from a legal point of view, under the Act, there is a ministerial discretion under the Act. So basically...
But there's always ministerial discretion.
And why is that there?
Because there could be extenuating circumstances.
Yeah.
In case somebody's au pair needs a visa.
Well, there's that. And that's a very important reason for having it.
Exactly. Good call, Joe. But the reason you have a ministerial sort of discretionary part to a lot of decision making is sometimes things don't actually fit neatly into a box. And you might just decide that in the interests of justice, where you really don't want to provide hard and fast rules, but just because of the vibe and because of other things that you can't foresee, you just want to say, you know what, here's a discretion, and there might be times when we pull the trigger on that. And so from a purely legal point of view, what's the point of having a ministerial discretion if not to use it? And I've been reading a bit, and I'm going to be, okay, I promised this last week, but I'm going to do my justice one definitely this week. It's definitely going to happen. But in terms of just what's just, what I'm considering in this is what sort of society are we encouraging, and what sort of culture are we encouraging when we can be just cruel to people and belligerent and treating people the way we wouldn't want to be treated if it was us. So when you start sort of locking people up without trial, and in this case, they're having the full trial, but when you start being really hard on people who are not Australians, before you know it, you develop a sort of an atmosphere, well, this might eventually happen to Australians. So, for example, part of our, we refused to allow the Australian citizens in India back into the country because of COVID-19. And part of the genesis of that is we spent a lot of time telling people you're not allowed in here, being foreigners. It's only one more step to say to actual Australians, we're not letting you in either because of different circumstances. Like, you create an atmosphere and a culture of belligerence and cruelty that isn't necessarily a good thing. So that's kind of the way I'm leaning on this. But Paul, I can't pick you on this one, Paul, by the faces you're pulling. I don't know what you're
Can you usually pick me?
It's hard.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know.
Okay, look, I don't feel any personal animosity towards these people at all. In fact, I feel quite a lot of sympathy for them. But I did read an interesting piece on the issue by Amanda Vanstone, who, as you know, was Minister for Immigration for about 4 years in one of the Howard governments. And she basically ended the piece by saying, if they're allowed to stay, I don't have a big problem with it. But she also said, look, there are a lot of people who'd like to come and live in Australia. And a lot of them apply offshore. If they're rejected, they have no choice. They have to wear it. They just have to accept the decision. She said these people, this particular couple, came here separately, I believe.
Yes.
They met here and became a couple here while their application for residency or for some whatever visa they were applying for was not settled. So she said, why would you, knowing that there was a pretty good chance you wouldn't be allowed to stay in the country, you would have to relocate overseas, why would you then have 2 children? It could have been just, nature taking its course.
They should have just frozen their eggs and waited till they were settled in 30 years.
I don't think that added anything to the argument. Sorry, Joe. But no, she said basically, why would you then go and have kids unless you were trying to manipulate the system? Because she said, people.
Well, maybe they thought they were going to be successful.
Well, she made the point that they were legally in limbo.
Yeah, but when you say why would they, the answer to that would be because they thought they were going to get allowed in. That would be.
Well, maybe not, because she said clearly a lot of people know that, once you've got kids, it's so much easier to build a case for sympathy, And so it could have been a very deliberate act on their part to have kids because they knew it would generate mountains of sympathy for them, even prior to them having any idea that they would be allowed to stay. She said also, what if you, as an Australian, and you wanted to go and live in another country, I don't know what country, think of an example. I don't know. Maybe you want to go and live in the United States. Or
Iceland. I'd like to go.
Iceland. Okay, you go to Iceland. Okay, maybe on a tourist visa, and then you think, I'll just overstay my visa. I'll go underground. You know, I'll do odd jobs, whatever I need to do to stay. And then they catch you, and you say, look, I want to apply for permanent residency. And you know, I don't know what sort of system Iceland has, whether it's similar to Australia, where there's a long legal process to go through. But you know,
they don't get a lot of boat people in Iceland.
They probably don't. But apparently, it's a pretty nice place to live, although quite expensive. But you know, if you applied, and then they said, no, you can't stay, you have to leave, you'd accept it, wouldn't you? You wouldn't then try and play the system.
Yeah, the problem with that argument is I'm coming from a Western first world country, and so I'm not desperate, and my circumstances when I'm sent back to Australia are not grim.
That's true, but we cannot, as a country, have a policy where everybody who'd like to come here can come here.
Yeah, I agree with that.
We just cannot do that.
So I guess my position would be that I still think we should be turning boats back and not allowing them to come across and doing our best to stop them.
Do you know how this couple arrived in Australia? Because I'm not even sure.
I don't know.
Did they come on a boat or did they fly in?
Yeah, I don't know.
So I'm just reading it.
But I'm all for sort of stopping boats from coming and setting up systems both in Indonesia and on the water to sort of to stop it, because there would be a lot of boats come across if nothing was done.
Oh, absolutely.
They arrived by
there'd be
boat in
thousands.
2012.
By boat, wasn't it? Yeah.
By boat, did they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But once they make it, then I think that's the point at which you have to.
Once they make it.
Yeah, if they can get through, if they can run the gauntlet and get through it, then I sort of think, well, at that point we have to treat them according to different rules. So that would be my cut-off point. I mean, what do you think of the American system where babies born in America get automatic citizenship? Do you think that's a bad or a good rule?
I don't have really a strong opinion on that. And I know it's not the case in Australia. You know, you can have a baby in Australia. It doesn't necessarily become Australian citizen. I don't know. I think Amanda Vanstone makes some pretty good points. You know, she said basically, if you've got a set of rules for your immigration system to formalise, you know, an orderly system, and you've got to have criteria of some kind, and these people have repeatedly failed the criteria. They've repeatedly failed, not just once,
and do you worry?
But repeatedly. And they've got these children now, and they know, and they've got community support. It attracts a lot of sympathy.
But they've been here for 8 years now, and they're still not settled?
Well, they may be settled in a physical sense, but they've been rotting the system.
And maybe the problem is we're not making decisions on visas quickly enough.
Well, that might be true too.
Do you worry about the culture that this creates, where we're
plotting and
imprisoning people on a remote island?
I don't think it's a good thing at all.
And do you worry?
And I personally, Shay, I don't care what people in other countries think about Australians due to our immigration law. But we have our immigration law. We've got to have a system.
Yeah.
What other people think of it is their problem, not ours.
Do you worry about
the rhetoric around people plotting their lives in Australia seems like part of the narrative of Australians being xenophobic. Like, really, someone would go to that length to stay in Australia? They'd be like, "Ooh, let's have a baby," with everything that comes with actually having a baby. That's the case we're making.
Would. Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Some people would have babies.
Well, I don't think that's valid.
But people have babies for all kinds of reasons, you know, and they're not always. Which is not always what we would think are legitimate reasons in terms of, you know, having a baby to manipulate a legal system. I don't think that should be rewarded if that is the case.
Yes, which is not provable.
Not provable, but it could well be the case, you know.
But strange.
People have had babies for stranger reasons than that.
I just think that is flawed. If you're really going to make a case for responsible immigration policy, that we're going to use that tactic as possible fear that people are not being responsible about whether or not they choose to be parents. as
No, that's
how
not
we
the criteria.
state the case.
That's not the criteria.
I know, but you seem to be making that is a valid point that we have to consider
No,
when
I'm not.
formulating immigration policy.
No. I'm not saying that's what our legal system has to consider. I'm saying that it could well be the case that couple.
Well, if our legal system isn't considering it, then
that
why
couple
are we?
Consciously decided that would further their case. In that case, they are using the children as tools.
We have no idea whether that's the
We
case.
don't know. We don't know. But
Longbow.
you know, as for people thinking we're xenophobic, who gives a fuck? You know, they can think what they like. I don't think we
because we
base our
aren't.
self-image
The point was we aren't.
on what we think other people think
aren't.
of us.
Some of us are, but that we
Some
aren't.
of us are what?
Xenophobic, but a lot of us aren't. That's my point.
So what?
Not that I care what the international community is that it's inaccurate. That's what I care
What
about.
does it matter if a small number of Australians are xenophobic? I think you'll find that's
No.
true in every
My point is
country.
not that a small amount are xenophobic, that the majority aren't. And consequently, our policy and our legislation should consider that.
How is it relevant?
It is relevant because as a country, we should be in line with how our people are and what we represent.
We are
and
in line with it.
Except
Well,
for that we're
it's-
espousing harmful views
it's-
about possible plotted pregnancies
So-
as a reason
so
to stay.
Shay's saying
We're
it's
not
a-
espousing a view.
Shay's,
You are
We're-
espousing a
Shay's-
borrowed
No,
view.
I think you misunderstand the word espouse.
Shay's saying there's a misrepresentation that people will think Australians are assholes
Who cares what they think?
when it's not a reflection of who we are.
So
is
what?
she's saying.
Let them think what they like.
So, well, are we that sort of people?
I don't think so, but-
are we the sort of people who
It seems we are.
spend $6 million?
No, we're not.
Are we the sort of people who will spend $6 million to reopen a facility on a remote island and lock up
Yeah.
a small family of Tamils who were well accepted by the community that they were in? Like, are we going to let that happen?
It's a tangled web. I agree.
And not at some point say, stop. This is not.
It's a very tangled web.
This
and
is not
it-
fair.
Perhaps another side of the argument would be they should have been deported sooner. You know? Would that have been a better solution? Deport them sooner, before they had the kids?
I think to keep their reputation up, they could have taken better care of them while they're on Christmas Island.
Why does reputation come into it? What's reputation got to do with it? It's a matter of law.
Because I just think it's important.
But it's a matter of law. It's a matter of process. That's all it's about, really.
Well, that's not what you brought
well,
here.
well,
Why has law suddenly become so important to you?
Of course it's important. We're talking about immigration. Immigration is governed by the immigration laws that we institute in our parliament.
Yeah.
We
Anyway.
don't just make it up as we go along,
Here we
you know,
go.
according to who has a sad face and who's had a couple of pups, you know.
Fun fact.
That is like so unfair considering what they've been through. They spent 10 days saying
Lots
this little kid.
of people go through much, much worse than those people.
But this is very unnecessary what they're going through. Like this
Of course it's unnecessary. Lots of things in life are
But tell
unnecessary.
you what, it would only be a small number of Aussies who have gone through anything like what this family's gone through.
So what? What does
Well,
that
when
have
you
to
said
do with
lots
anything?
have, you only just said lots have.
I'm not talking about Aussies. I'm talking about people who want to come and live in Australia.
Right.
There are thousands of people in Indonesia,
And
waiting, who have applied to
There was an
migrate here.
Australian citizen who got locked
Well,
up.
I'm not saying they should all be allowed in because
No,
it's
I
just-
know you're
it's
not saying
practical.
that. But Shay
saying-
seems to be saying that, you know, because it's so cruel what they've been going through, we should allow them to stay here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
That is
why
exactly what
not-
I'm saying.
Why not? Why not invite all those thousands of refugees in Indonesia who are going through pretty hard times too? Why not invite them in too? Because they've had a hard time.
Well,
We don't invite people just because
Yes,
they've had
let's
a
have
hard
it-
time.
let's-
That's just not the criteria.
Well,
we
okay.
use.
So, all right. I'm not in favour of a fully open border because I just see a disaster
Thank Christ for
if
that.
that's the case. But are you in favour of a fully open border, Shay? Like, I mean, are you prepared? Do you think we should? Well, we've got agents on the ground in Indonesia who are in the villages sniffing around. Who's got a boat ready to go? Ringing our authorities and saying, there's a boat leaving on Tuesday from this village, keep an eye out for it, all that sort of stuff. Should we have people doing that? And should we have patrols near the edge of our territory that are turning people back? Because I would have to say I agree with that policy, because I could sense that we would get thousands of boats coming.
We would have tens of thousands of people arriving every year.
Yep.
Tens of thousands.
Yep. So what do you think?
Well, I just think it needs to be looked at to see if we can do it with more dignity and more humanity.
That's pretty fuzzy language.
I think a
if you don't
regional
mind me
process.
saying.
Well, why don't you give me a chance to go back over all the immigration policies and get back to you in 2 weeks about how I feel about it.
Okay.
And then,
But do you
and
agree
then you
with
can just argue with me anyway.
the Green Senator Sarah Harper Young?
Hanson, Young.
Oh, Hanson Young, sorry. That we
I don't
should
know
have
what she
open
said.
borders. Well, she seems to think we should just let anyone who can get here to come and stay. She has said that a number of times, I believe, in recent years, hasn't she?
I don't know.
Yeah,
But
I don't know
I
either.
recall.
Tom, the warehouse guy, says you don't want to do a Merkel. So in
What's
German,
Merkel,
Angela
yes.
Merkel, of course, allowed 1 million refugees in. Well, okay. I think, was that like a one-off 1 million and then it's since stopped? Is kind of
It
what's
was
happening
also,
there.
I think, the part of the world they came from and some of the attitudes they brought with them
Yes.
was the concern.
Yes.
And what's been the impact?
Oh, huge on German people.
Like, for instance,
Women being raped, people being murdered. Yeah, not thousands and thousands of Germans being murdered, obviously, but there have been a number of
The accusation was
attacks.
that there were a lot of young men who came in who had grown up in a very paternalistic society and were suddenly thrust into a Western society and were acting out as if they were in their home country.
Exactly.
And behaving to women in a way that wasn't acceptable.
Exactly.
What?
And there was a notable incident. It was Christmas or New Year or something like that in a city in Germany. And it was quite common for, young people to come out and congregate in this big square near
That was in Cologne.
Cologne, was it? And there were groups of young migrant men from these,
which is
culturally
in
Muslim.
France, right?
No,
We
Germany.
haven't seen Cologne.
Yeah, Cologne.
Oh no,
It's in
you're right, it's
Germany.
Germany. Yeah. Proceed.
And a number of young women were not just molested; some of them were raped that night because they were going out. Young German women, like Australian women. They dress, in whatever they feel like dressing like. They feel that they're free, that they're entitled to go out and walk around unaccompanied at night. And a whole bunch of them were seriously
we are
assaulted.
always so appalled by sex crimes when it's done by refugees.
No.
Always so
Well,
appalled.
Well, look, the point is, as Joe made clear, that these young men grow up in cultures or have grown up in cultures where young women do not have that freedom and that those rights to just be autonomous individuals and wander around at night, and they treat them like fair game. They really do. Ayaan Hirsi Ali has written about this extensively, and she's got a new book out.
There is
on
a
the topic.
danger of a clash of cultures. Yeah, there is that danger. But, if you really want value for money in helping refugees, you would actually spend money on the ground in the poorer countries, because
Absolutely.
for $1,000 you can buy a lot of stuff in a poor country that will keep somebody going. But our refugee foreign aid, our foreign aid has dropped dramatically since Julie Bishop was in charge, and we're quite miserable when it comes to providing foreign aid. But anyway, enough of that topic. We'll move on to another one, and let's just talk about. So that was that. Just the guy who's going to make that decision is Alex Hawke. He's the minister, the immigration minister. Who's Alex Hawke? Is he a reasonable guy? Can
You're
we
a
trust
fan,
him?
apparently, aren't you, Trevor? Big fan.
He's a Pentecostal.
He must be a terrible person.
He was
then, if
raised
he's
an
a Pentecostal.
Anglican, and he's attracted to the Hillsong Church. He is. I'll quote some of the things he said. Is, "Do I inject my religion into my politics? No, but my religion guides the values and the ethics of the things I do. The two greatest forces for good in human history are capitalism and Christianity, and when they're blended, it's a very powerful duo. People say it's a broad church. My response is that you've got to agree it is a church. It's not a brothel, for instance. If people want to legalise drug injection rooms, lower the age of consent, go with all these trendy things, this is not the party that believes in those things. We're not that broad. So that's the guy making the decision about the Biloela family. Good luck with that.
I don't think he's really authorised to make such a sweeping statement on behalf of the entire Liberal Party of Australia, frankly.
No, but he's given his own personal view. Yeah. And it just always fascinates me that would Jesus recognise these people as Jesus followers, you know, if Jesus existed.
Indeed.
Yeah. So that's that.
But look, that's an interesting thing. And, you know, I'm a long-term atheist and I don't buy this religious bullshit any more than you do. However, I'm open to the argument that Christianity has influenced our moral structure in even secular Australia or secular Western countries. I think that's almost undeniable.
Well, given there's a lot of Christians.
No, I don't just mean for practicing Christians.
Right.
I mean for our secular society now. Where did our values come from? I think to some degree. I wouldn't say completely, because like you, I'm more into enlightenment.
Just name one value.
Forgiveness.
That wasn't around before...
forgiveness.
Before Christianity, it wasn't around?
Well, my reading of history is it was probably somewhat scarce.
Right. It looks pretty scarce at the moment sometimes if we're looking at the Biloela family.
Yeah, exactly.
But like you went to a Catholic school, right? And you were indoctrinated, right? Now you've rejected it as an adult, and you might have even rejected it as a child. I'm not sure. Shay, did you have any religious instruction as a child?
Yes.
At school?
Grew up, Catholic, went to Catholic schools, went to Sunday Mass every week.
Joe?
All public schools in the UK, state schools are Anglican.
They're all Anglican?
They are all.
Oh, right.
Were when I was growing up. Yeah.
So you did get in religious
Absolutely.
instruction. Look, I'm inclined to think that we all imbibed something of the Christian ethic unconsciously. Frankly, I think
forgiveness. You're saying is a Christian ethic that wasn't around.
I think for me, forgiveness is one of the Christian ethics that I can sort of think, that's not a bad value to have, and I can divorce it from the religious teachings.
Vicarious redemption.
I'd have to think about that.
But something like the Golden Rule, for example, was around a long time before Christianity and developed.
You sure?
And isn't in the Bible.
Yes, thousands of years beforehand.
In all human cultures?
In many human cultures, and in the same way that cultures that developed independently of Christianity, e.g. China, developed civilizations.
But is forgiveness part of the Golden Rule before you go on?
No, but I'm giving it as an example of what we consider a moral sort of attitude or a key moral, that do unto others as you'd like to be treated yourself. Yeah,
but that's not the same as forgiveness, is it?
No, but I'm giving it as an example where I know for a fact that the Golden Rule was the notion of the Golden Rule is around a long time before Christianity. And are you suggesting that cultures around the planet that were not touched by Christianity did not have forgiveness?
No, I'm not saying that.
So it can arise independently of Christianity.
Of course it can.
Yep.
But where did it come from in our case, in our culture?
So it could well have developed in our culture and have been adopted by Christianity.
Do you think?
Hey, it might have been a pagan ethic that was co-opted.
Has Christianity ever copied anything from anybody before?
Of course it has.
Well, exactly. Like you could say
but was forgiveness one of the things they copied?
Well, Judaism, did it have forgiveness in it or not?
I don't think it did, really, frankly. I don't think it was a, what would you say, a prominent ethic in Judaism is my reading. I could be wrong, but It seems to me that, and I've read other people say that the act of forgiveness was one of the quite odd and different things about Christianity when it came along as a kind of, as a religion. You know, it was sort of a little bit different to most because basically ancient peoples often weren't very forgiving. You know, they'd go into a place, they'd kill everyone. You know, there wasn't a lot of forgiveness around in a lot of societies, is my reading.
They didn't reach a point at times where, okay, I'm over it. Like,
well, they might have, but what I'm saying is forgiveness was a really, really important principle in Christianity.
Okay, and here's what I'm saying is it could easily develop independently and be adopted by Christianity. And sure, Christianity has been a carrier of the notion of forgiveness because Christianity has been in our culture.
Okay.
But I'm quite
clearly you don't want to give Christianity credit for anything good.
No, I don't.
That's the feeling I get.
I don't want to give it any credit that it doesn't deserve.
Well, do you give it credit for anything good, anything positive at all?
Look, yes.
What?
There would be some people, for example, who really hit the skids in jails, for example, who find God and who find a purpose that they stop a lot of really bad habits because of a finding of God. Now, the same happens with Muslims and with other religions as well, where some people will flick a switch and will actually turn a corner, taken under the wing of a pastor or whatever.
Yeah,
and
that happens.
And
we know that's illusionary,
yeah,
but
and
in terms of day-to-day normal life for people in a society.
There would be all sorts of salvation. You know, there's sort of op shops and things, soup kitchens, all sorts of things that are run by Christian groups. So there are some things that are...
That's it? You don't think there's any principle or any ideas in Christianity?
Hang on a minute. You asked me, and I've kept talking and giving examples, and you're telling me... kitchens.
Are
they bad examples?
I think you can find those in just about any country, regardless of the religion.
That's my point.
So that's all you've got.
No, but,
that's all you.
But Paul, I haven't stopped talking, and you're saying, "Is that all you've got?" Like,
all right, keep talking.
You know,
keep talking.
You said, "Give me some." You don't think Christianity's done any good, and I'm non-stop telling you some good things it's done, and you keep saying to me, you keep interrupting me, and saying, "Is that it? Is that it? Is that the only thing?"
Keep going.
So, it's obviously a powerful influence in our culture. But it is carrying stories and narratives that we had anyway. So in the same way that cultures that don't have Christianity carry these notions through them in whatever cultural norms they have, of course Christianity adopts some of these. So it's a carrier of ideas, some of them good and some of them bad, but none of them that I would sense are unique to Christianity that we wouldn't have got without Christianity. And in many cases, it's thwarted the spread of good ideas because it's mucked it up with a whole bunch of bad ideas. So are you suggesting that we're much better off because of Christianity than we would have been had it not arisen? Is it? Bearing in mind we've got 31 topics to get through here.
No, I really don't know. I really don't know, but I'm open to discussion on the idea.
You've been listening to too much Jordan Peterson.
I think more importantly is...
I don't listen to Jordan Peterson regularly at all.
But this is the Jordan Peterson argument.
Well, I don't know it. I don't know Jordan Peterson's religious argument at all.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Well, I'll give it to you now. If Jordan
so
Peterson,
don't accuse me of being a Jordan Peterson acolyte, please, because I'm not.
Okay, but his...
No, there's a guy called Tom Holland, a British historian, who's written some interesting stuff about the Middle East.
Right.
And I haven't read the book, but I'm curious to see it. He's written a book where he makes the case that Christianity has actually made a positive contribution to European cultures. But as I said, I haven't read the book, so I don't know what his argument is exactly.
So Jordan Peterson basically has this view that Christianity is such a strong force in our culture that we have adopted the morals of Christianity, even if we are atheists and think that we haven't, that we've by osmosis adopted Christian values, is the sort of Jordan Peterson line. So, but depends on your branch of Christianity. Like when you look at the Protestants, it's really, do you have faith in God? and do you believe in the Bible, and you're off to heaven. There isn't a lot of moral instruction in a Protestant ethic about forgiveness of your fellow man. It's more concerned with, do you have faith in the Lord? And that's what you need to have in order to get to heaven. They're not really concerned.
I don't agree with you. I think there's a very strong element of forgiveness in Christianity.
But
when I think about
not all branches is what I'm saying. And so in the Protestant branch, it's
I went to a Protestant church as a child, and I have to say that even though I rejected, the whole lot of it, basically from my late teens onwards, and I went to church and Sunday school and youth club and all that for years and years and years. So I got a lot of it. But when I think back, what did I take from it? I don't know. I tend to think maybe the idea that, if people do something bad to you and then they sort of say, oh, sorry, I was wrong, I made a mistake. You say, okay, that's cool. You forgive them.
What's the Bible story that exemplifies forgiveness?
I don't remember. Do you?
Prodigal son.
Maybe.
He didn't.
He forgave the son for running off.
Right.
That's probably the closest.
The son decided he didn't want to, obey the family rules. He ran off to have a fast life, and then things didn't go so well, so he came back home. Is that the one?
And was forgiven.
And then the other son was jealous or something.
Yes. Because his father told him to go off and kill the fatted calf.
Right.
And to prepare a feast for his brother's return.
Yes. Yes.
Because he was forgiven for running off.
Yeah.
That's probably the closest that I can think of.
Yeah. Any others?
There are a lot of different variations in Protestant Christianity too, of course, which you're aware of. You can't just say Catholicism and Protestant. I mean, it's much more diverse than that.
Anyway, we've digressed.
We have, as we do, which is okay.
In the chat room, keep going in the chat room.
It was Alex Hawke we were talking about, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you don't like him because he's a member of the Pentecostals, yes.
I just don't know how much Christian charity you're going to get out of Alex Hawke based on the quotes that I just gave. So,
and their whole ethos is, if you're poor, you deserve it because you didn't work hard.
Yes.
And God doesn't favour you.
Well, that's Calvinism.
Yeah. And
predestination.
It's sort of, the Pentecostals quite like this prosperity gospel stuff. They're into that. So
they are.
Yeah. Look, Israel and Palestine has been in the news a bit lately, and I thought in the next 5 minutes we would just solve the whole Israeli-Palestinian problem.
Do we even need 10 minutes?
Yep. So I think there's been a change of attitude a little bit about Israel in the last sort of year or two, I think. It seems to me. I think there's a bit of a turning of the tide against Israel.
It does seem to be popular to bash Israel these days.
Yeah.
It's been popular for decades to bash Israel.
But you know what the word that's being used that I think is making a difference, and I'm going to get my pronunciation wrong here, but apartheid or apartheid is a description that's being used to describe the current state of affairs. And I think that's having an effect where people are going, it is kind of an apartheid state where people are being treated very differently based on not so much skin colour, but religion.
Ethnicity.
Ethnicity. And I think that's sticking. I think that is actually having an effect on this, and people are starting to question a bit more the Israeli position.
But is it really apartheid?
Well, let's talk about it. So have you got on the map?
Not yet.
Yeah. So if you're listening just to the audio version, somewhere, go to the show notes and you'll see some maps. But basically, I think this helps explain the position, because if you haven't really looked at a map of Israel and understood what's going on in terms of the transition of the territories, it's hard to understand what's really going on there. So on the screen, we've got a map of Israel, which was basically the agreement that took place after the Second World War as to how that sort of area was going to be divided up between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And basically, Israel, long skinny shape running north to south, and there were 3 islands of Palestinian sort of enclaves that were going to take place in that territory, and that was going to be the division. It was going to be 2 states, and the Palestinians would control these 3 little islands, and the Israelis would control the remainder, and there would be some sort of joint, there's going to be some independent overseeing of the area of Jerusalem. That was the plan back in 1947-48, and up until that time, the British were in charge under the British mandate, and as soon as they left, there was a big war, and basically the neighbouring Arab states joined with the Palestinians in fighting against the Israelis.
Not with the Palestinians.
With the Arabs.
Just the neighbouring Arab states.
The neighbouring Arab states.
Up.
Yes, but they would have been within the existing Israeli-Palestinian territories were Israelis and Palestinians.
No, there was no PLO in 1948.
But there were non-Israelis who would have joined with the Arab states. How do you want to describe them?
I think that's an assumption on your part.
Did they just stand by and
have you
watch
read? No, well, my understanding is most of the Palestinian people, common people who lived there at the time, probably just, kept their heads down and tried to stay out of the line of fire.
It was very much a power grab between the multiple states.
Yeah, it was Egypt and Jordan and Syria just all made an agreement that they would all invade Israel at the same time and,
and the existing
beat them up.
And the existing Palestinians on the ground?
I don't think they were involved.
They just stood on the side and watched?
There was an Arab terrorist group who came from Syria in the late 1930s or 40s. I forget what it was now. I was reading about it this afternoon. And they were murdering Jews. So there was an Arab terrorist organisation that had come in from Syria, was what I read, I think. And they were murdering Jews. So there was an Arab terrorist element, but it wasn't the PLO as we know them now.
No, I wouldn't call
and
it
I
the
don't
PLO.
think,
but
I read nothing that indicated Palestinian civilians were actively involved in that war.
They certainly so Arab leaders and governments rejected it. The dividing up of the territory.
Well, they didn't want a Jewish state there at all.
Yeah.
So that's why they invaded, to eliminate it.
Yes. And I can't imagine that the Arabs living there who were told this is now Israeli land said, okay, take my land for your state of Israel.
Of course they wouldn't. But you know that Jewish people and organisations were buying land from the late 1880s.
Yes. I'm just struggling with this concept that the Arabs who were there, the non-Jews, stood idly by during this and didn't pick a side.
So the Palestinians...
Why wouldn't they? Well, I mean, if you don't have a gun, Trevor, and there's an army invading from that side, and you got the Jewish army sort of fighting, what would you do if you didn't have a gun? You'd keep your head down, wouldn't you? You'd try to stay out of it.
Okay.
Wouldn't you? So if you don't have a weapon, you're not in the game.
If my Arab brothers are running over the hill and they're trying to kick out these...
But they're not your Arab brothers.
Who...
They're different tribes.
Are they going to kick out the Jews who have taken my land under this agreement with the British?
I don't think the Palestinians were any kind of unified nation of people, to be honest.
Okay.
And the Jews were paying top dollar for the land they bought. They were paying a lot more than probably the land was worth. And what I read, and it could be wrong, but what I read was they were mainly buying land that was either uninhabited or very sparsely inhabited because they didn't really want to alienate the agriculturally productive local Palestinian Arabs.
There was a civil war before the other countries came into the event.
Sorry?
There was a civil war.
Oh, in Israel, there was a war between the Jewish nationalists and the British governing elements there.
Yes.
And there was and you know, I think you made a note of it
the
in your notes.
Israelis actually invented modern terrorism.
Well, Begin, you know, Menahem Begin, who became
Yes.
prime minister, he was in one of the terrorist groups that blew up a hotel in Jerusalem and killed about 70 or 80 people or something.
British Army base.
Yes, and I think that was a big incentive for the British to leave, wasn't it? Because they realised that they had a big problem on their hands, and so I think they just sort of washed their hands of it and said, we're going home now.
Just coming back to the maps then, so irrespective of what the actual involvement of the on-the-ground non-Jewish people were at the time when the neighbouring Arab states invaded, at the end of the war there was basically the Israelis ended up with a lot more territory than what was designed under the original sort of plan. And what we then had was this a Gaza Strip, which was just near Egypt, and when you're looking at the map on the right-hand side of Israel, which is basically the eastern side neighbouring Jordan, was an area now known as the West Bank. And that patch there, the West Bank, is what's sort of the main trouble spot at the moment in terms of the settlements.
The settlements, yes.
Yeah. So that West Bank area, incidentally, we mentioned this before we started recording, even though it's on the eastern side of Israel, why is it called the Western Bank and the West Bank? And that is because Jordan actually named it. It's on the western side of the Jordan River. So that's the West Bank. Then there was another 6-day war back in 1967. And at the end of that, Israel basically had control of the entire region, including that West Bank area.
Okay, why was there a war first, Trevor? Let's not gloss over it too much, because
You tell me, Paul.
Egypt attacked.
Yeah.
You know, Egypt bought a whole lot of weapons off the Russians, or the Soviets, I should say. And they said, you know, we're going to go in and, you know, whoop these Israelis' asses.
It'll all be over in a flash.
And
it was.
They got their asses
They
whooped.
did. They did indeed. So basically, Israel then had control of this whole West Bank area.
And also the whole of the peninsula, Eilat.
A lot of extra territory towards Egypt. Is
Yeah,
that what you mean?
the huge peninsula off
yeah.
towards
Oh, the
Egypt.
Sinai Peninsula.
Sinai,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was captured by the Israelis.
But just dealing with this left bank area.
West Bank.
West Bank, sorry. Left bank, thinking Paris.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're a very cultured gentleman, aren't you?
Yeah. So in this area, after this war, basically Israeli settlers just started moving in and taking up plots of territory, and just started not swarming, but basically moving in and started settling in these areas. And it was a bit of a legally grey area in terms of, well, they just had this war, they've taken over this area, and they just started moving in and just kept moving in over time. And so in this whole left bank area, you've got these pockets and these islands of territory that have been controlled by Jews, Israelis, and living next to other pockets.
Do you think they were mainly sort of religious Jews?
I don't know. You sort of get the sense that they had to be quite hardcore to be up for the fight.
I don't know, but that's the feeling I get,
Yes.
is that they were people who were motivated by the sort of, you know, the myth of Israel being a gift from God,
Yes.
and that the land was rightfully theirs, so why wouldn't they go and live in it, you know? That
Yes.
sort of idea. And I'm not saying I agree with it,
Yep.
but I think that was at least part of the reasoning.
So anyway, over time, increasing numbers pour into this left bank area, and you just have these dotted pockets all over the area where you've got these pockets of Jews living in amongst pockets of Palestinians. And it really is a random sort of collection of different blotches on the map that you can see where these different groups are. And after the Oslo Accord, they basically tried to formalise these little islands or pockets. So there was a zone, an A zone, which was basically Palestinian government and Palestinian security control. Then there were these B zones, which were Palestinian government control but Israeli security control. And then the rest of the area was full Israeli control. And what you find now on the ground in Israel, in the West Bank, are these pockets of Israeli settlements that are really quite nice in many cases, and pockets of Palestinian areas that are not nearly so nice, and these flyover freeways that connect the Israeli pockets to the main land, if you like, of Israel, where they go through these narrow freeway corridors, joining up these pockets so that they can access the main parts of Israel. And when you really look at that, you think, what a mess, and how can this ever be resolved when you've got these groups who hate each other,
it's a mess,
who are so
thanks, Joe.
So enmeshed in each other with these little pockets everywhere, and on your left side will be it's an amazing sort of map to look at. So I recommend looking at the left bank and looking at a map of the Israeli and the Palestinian, or the Israeli settlements and the Palestinian towns, and getting a feel for what a jumbled mess it is and how could anything ever good come out of that. But
yeah, how do they ever set it right? You have to
Yes.
ask, because as you say, it's a mess, complete mess.
Yes, and well, some people would say from the very beginning that was always going to be the case, that all this was destined for disaster. And one of the people who said that was Einstein. So I've got some quotes here from Einstein, and 2 years before the state declared its independence in 1948, Albert Einstein described the proposed creation of Israel as something which conflicted with the essential nature of Judaism. So he couldn't understand why Israel was needed and said, "I believe it is bad." And he was asked to help out at times and he refused. He was even asked to be Israel's president at one point in 1952, but he turned it down. And there's a copy of a letter which Einstein wrote saying, "When a real and final catastrophe should befall us in Palestine, the first responsible for it would be the British, and the second responsible for it, the terrorist organisations built up from our own ranks. I'm not willing to see anybody associated with those misled and criminal people." He was quite critical of the Israeli leadership that was behind all this. He saw them as terrorist organisations. So Einstein...
I'm sorry, I can't help but notice he made a spelling mistake. I know English wasn't his first language, but...
yeah, well...
should be built rather than build.
Yes.
That's a minor point.
Yeah. Well, he was doing it on an old typewriter, and when you look at the letter, you can see that it wasn't easy to fix up mistakes on a typewriter. Yeah.
No, that's true.
So anyway, I thought that was interesting that Albert Einstein, and he never visited the state of Israel. So it's a bit of a flawed concept from the beginning, and if we're wondering why can't we fix it, it was probably because maybe it was just a flawed concept.
You know that there was actually a proposal that they were going to buy an area in the Kimberleys.
Vaguely.
Yeah, vaguely. Yeah.
Yep.
Given the irrigation schemes they've done for Israel.
Yeah.
Yep.
But, it's there now, and it's a reality. What do we do about it? Or what do they do about it? It's not up to us, of course. But, I was listening to Christopher Hitchens this afternoon, and I've also heard Sam Harris speak on the topic, and I think both of them regard the idea of Israel as a mistake from the beginning. The idea of creating a state based on one religio-ethnicity is a flawed one, deeply flawed, particularly coming from atheist philosophers like those guys. And I agree with them. But Sam Harris and I think Christopher Hitchens also, they basically said, look, it was a flawed concept from the beginning, but it's there now. You can't just undo it, It's now a functioning state, and it's a functioning society. You can't just say, "Oh, you guys were a mistake. Clear out, go somewhere else." It's just not going to happen, obviously. So we have to find some kind of solution, if that's possible, that accommodates everybody who's there, and that's going to be really difficult. I think everybody agrees.
I don't think Israelis are going to give the Palestinians full citizen rights and full access to
some of them
the
are citizens, of course. And they even, in the new government, they have an Arab party as part of the new coalition.
I listened to a podcast, History Hit, and there was an interview with Daniel Finkelstein, who was talking about the foundation of the Jewish state, and said that after the Second World War, well, in fact, before then, but the Jews had been in the middle of all the European conflicts of the 19th century. And every time one invading force came across and kicked the other lot out, the Jews always got the blame. And they felt that they would never be safe in anything other than a country of their own, which is where Zionism came from.
Yep.
Yes.
Was this idea that they were always the scapegoat. And that wherever they were going to be, they would always be at war. So it was better that they were at war in their own country with their own defence rather than relying on a third party.
Yep.
And you can understand where they came from.
Absolutely.
Yes, but it required them to
seize territory.
Yes.
But they started by buying it, Trevor, and that's the point. They, the Zionists as a political movement started in the late 19th century, and they went to Israel and started buying land, paying top dollar for what was, according to what I read, pretty much unused or very marginally used land.
If they'd continued just buying land, then that would have been okay.
It would have been better.
But they didn't.
But the point Joe made is a very valid one, and that's, as you said, that's where Zionism came from. And Zionism, by the way, is not apartheid. Zionism is just the idea that Jews need their own homeland.
Now, whether or not it's Palestine that was granted to them by God, that's a whole different question.
Well, that's mythical, of course.
Tom in the chat room says, completely agree with 12th Man and Joe on this. Are you two agreeing?
I don't know that we're agreeing, but that I can certainly understand it's a very difficult question because the Jews have been atrociously treated for 1,000 years.
Yes.
And when the other people or some journalists have called on America to act, is that because America's the superpower, or because they have 7.5 million Jews in America?
Or because the Jewish state was funded with American military hardware.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's probably why.
And they still get a certain amount of free military stuff.
Right.
The Americans give them aid. They would call it military aid, but it's like high tech, the best weapons that you can buy.
Okay.
Because they have some influence over them, I guess, is why they'd be calling on them to say, well, you've got some influence. You wouldn't call them the Russians because they wouldn't have any influence.
Yeah. But if they were to, heed that call, what are their options? Like they asked for a ceasefire, they pretty much got one.
I don't think the Americans have that much leverage, to be honest.
Yeah.
No.
I think that the Israelis are a very, what would you say, self-sufficient, proud and determined bunch. And if the American president said to them, we're going to stop military aid to you if you don't do what we say, I think the Israelis would tell them to get fucked, basically. I think they would just say, you don't sell us weapons, we'll buy them somewhere else. But we'll
make them ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And they do.
Yes.
They have a very prosperous high-tech industry in Israel.
I've seen a quote, and I don't know that this is true, but effectively Israel doesn't have friends, it just has
customers.
Business.
Well,
customers and suppliers.
Just useful, non-interested people.
Right. Yes.
And therefore the relationship with America is a little one-sided.
I mean, Judaism was the first religion that was... religions up until that point in time, people were polytheistic in many ways. And really, what's your religion? I don't care. Like, the people had their own religions and they'd chop and change, and if they needed a god for the weather, they had a god for the weather, and if they had a god for prosperity, they'd turn on that one or call on that one. And Judaism was the first one to say, we're a special people and we are different to the rest of you. And in some sense...
But they were polytheistic in the beginning.
They were.
Yeah, but by the end they weren't.
No.
So, and that's sort of coming back to bite them, where they've created... they were the start of quite a divisive religious notion, I think. So they're sort of reaping a little bit of what they sowed right from the very beginning.
I don't think Judaism is unique in terms of a religion that creates problems for the people that use it.
No, but it was the first to come along and really promote that.
Hinduism
sort of,
is probably just as old, and it creates all kinds of...
It's older.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought.
And did Hindus consider themselves to be special people and other people are lesser people?
Yes, they do.
Right.
In fact, I remember years ago when I first started travelling overseas, and I took a flight with Air India. And I don't know if someone told me, or I read it somewhere, that Hindus, because of their class system, if you're not a Hindu, you're technically in the lower caste. You're a non-caste person.
Right.
And therefore, you're equal to the untouchables.
Right.
So, yes, they do. I'm not saying all Hindus in this day and age look down on non-Hindus. I'm not suggesting that at all. But traditionally in Hinduism, if you were not a Hindu, you were of a lower level than them. So, yes, they did have certain attitudes towards non-Hindus that are perhaps comparable to the attitudes Jews had to non-Jews and Christians had to non-Christians and Muslims have to non-Muslims and etc.
And I guess with Pakistan, then they're sort of in India and having the same problems.
Yep.
Where does Australia sit in terms of Israel? And I've got an article here where... Dear listener, if you're new to this podcast, all the show notes appear on the website and there's the articles and you can read all this and there's all sorts of links. So check out the website at some stage and have a look at all the notes. So got this link to an article and basically the argument is that our current Australian government is one of the most pro-Israeli governments that we've had in our history, according to this writer. And what he said is that, for example, a few short weeks after Morrison took office in August 2018, he proclaimed that his government would now recognise Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And it seems one of the reasons for that, dear listener, is that under Pentecostal theology, the... what is it when they are? It's not revelation. It's not. It's
the end of times.
Yeah, the end of times when you're going to be drawn up into heaven. It starts with R, and this word is on the tip of my tongue. But essentially, they feel under their theology that can't occur until till Jerusalem is handed back properly to the Jews, and at that point it opens the opportunity for the second coming of the Lord and the end times. So, and a
lot of them believe there will be a...
Rapture, thank you, is the word. Yep.
But before that, a lot of them believe there will be a big war in the Israel area.
And if that's necessary...
Prior to the second coming.
And if that's necessary in order to get the second coming, well and good, is the theory there. So other examples, or things we don't know about, is Australia's record in the UN. So... what we've got here again. For good measure, Morrison also announced that he would instruct Australia to vote against a motion for the Palestine Authority to chair a meeting of the Group of 77 developing nations affiliated to the UN. In that vote, out of 146 countries, only 3 voted against it. Australia, the USA and Israel. So this is just to chair a meeting of developing nations, and we joined Israel and the US in voting against Palestine being able to do that.
But the UN is really a corrupt body now, you have to admit. It's a really corrupt body. You know, the Human Rights Commission, it's chaired by Saudi Arabia, is it? And China is on it. I mean, it's literally stacked with countries with appalling human rights records. So you can imagine the Australian government being a little bit cynical about...
this is the same Australian government that calls for the rule of international law and
Yeah.
And let's get China into line and send some inspectors in. But I digress. You know, he's all happy to rely on these international bodies when it suits him.
Yes.
Who is?
Morrison.
Is he?
Yeah. Exhibit A I just gave you. So, okay. Just
I don't
moving
think
on.
he's relying on it.
Well, calling on them.
I think he's just offering an opinion or some guidance.
Calling on them. So, in terms of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, Morrison wanted Australia to join only 2 other countries that would have their embassies in Jerusalem, and that was going to be the American embassy that Trump had proposed, and that of Guatemala. So we're in the category of America and Guatemala on that score. And it was uproar and threats to Australia's exports. Malaysia, Indonesia, various others complained, so we backed down from that one, if you're wondering. Also, we ended up in a minority of 2 at the UN Human Rights Council last June, opposing 3 motions that condemned Israeli expansions. In this, we were partnered only by the Marshall Islands, the tiny US client state with a population of 58,000. So Australia and the Marshall Islands were the only ones in that particular vote. That's just odd company to be keeping in terms of UN votes, I would have thought.
Saudi Arabia being the United Nations women's rights. Paul's mentioned that.
He's already mentioned that, yes.
Right.
The failings of the UN bodies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Iran's on it too now. I read, I think today or yesterday, Iran has been appointed to the body that oversees, women's affairs, women's rights. Can you believe it? Iran.
So we've got some strange voting records in the UN.
To police it, or is it a point of encouraging
well, they're on the
inclusivity?
council.
Right.
I don't know exactly what such
In
a body
what
does,
role?
but surely they would be involved in, allocating funds to various programs to benefit women, wouldn't they? I assume.
Don't know.
That's alarming.
Don't know.
And I also read that 3 women in Iran have recently together been given a total of 30 years in jail between the 3 of them for refusing to wear the hijab and for encouraging other women not to wear it. 30 years between the 3 of them. And they're on the Women's Rights Council. It's appalling.
So is America.
Sorry?
America's on the Human Rights Council.
But they don't make women wear the hijab.
No, but they commit plenty of human rights atrocities around the globe. Just saying.
I think that's a stretch, Trevor. Atrocities. They don't.
Really.
They're not locking up tens of thousands of their own people like the Chinese are.
Atrocities. But America hasn't been involved in atrocities.
Of course they have, historically.
Regularly. Since in the Cold War era, they haven't been involved in dozens of atrocities.
Dozens of atrocities,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah, they haven't been.
I'm pretty sure it's in your notes.
So
It is.
What
yeah.
has the US done that China hasn't?
Yeah, where did
Should
I
we
put
go
that?
there?
Where is that?
They're Trevor's notes, Shay.
Yeah.
They are not from a history book.
Just a summary of history.
It's a summary of your interpretation of history. That's what it
God,
is.
do I have to find that? Okay. What has the US done that China hasn't? This is from John Menadue. I mean, what would he know? This is John Menadue himself.
He's an old lefty.
So what would
He obviously hates America
he
as much as you do.
worked for News Corp, the old lefty,
Seriously.
former ambassador. So, what have they done? Invaded and killed people in Vietnam,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Korean
we know
Peninsula,
all
Dominican Republic,
We know all
Haiti,
that.
Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and Grenada.
We've been through all this
Engineered
before.
coups d'etat in Chile, El Salvador, Yugoslavia, Honduras, Colombia, Vietnam, and more. Imposed sanctions denying food and medicines to Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, and Iran. So, I don't
You
know,
blame
it's,
America for Venezuela still? You blame America for Cuba still?
imposing
Their own
sanctions,
governments are the problem in those countries.
imposing sanctions, denying food and medicine to those countries. So, So yes, I do. And anybody who wants to read up on those will come to a similar conclusion, I'm sure. Okay, back up to where we were. We're going to get to Dark Emu very soon. But before we do, because you guys are already arguing over that today, there's a very interesting case happened where there was an environment minister, Susan Ley, who was making a decision about, I think, extending a mine, a massive extension to a coal mine. And 8 teachers and an 86-year-old nun launched a case to prevent the minister from approving this massive coal mine. And in the federal court Justice Mordechai Bromberg found...
Mordecai.
Thank you.
It's a Jewish name, isn't it?
It is.
Sounds very Jewish,
yeah.
Mordecai Bromberg.
Yeah. He found that the Environment Minister had a duty of care not to act in a way that would cause future harm to young people. So he found that, in fact, it's possible for a group of young people to take the Environment Minister to court and say, this mine is going to dump all this carbon into the atmosphere, which is a danger to us, and we want the minister to owe us we think the minister owes us a duty of care and should be stopped from approving the mine. Now, in the end, the judge said, I agree with you that there is a duty of care. I'm not going to give you the injunction just yet because I'm not sure that she's demonstrated she's going to make the decision in favour of the mine. So, but basically the principle that a group of young people could claim a duty of care and stop a minister from opening a mine is an extraordinary legal event, dear
It's
listeners.
extraordinary. Absolutely
I
extraordinary.
think it sets a precedent that says that government ministers can't act in the short-term interests. They have to act in the long-term interests.
But in that case, they would need a crystal ball.
I think that there are some things that are predictable.
Climate isn't predictable into the future. I mean, who knows what the climate's going to be doing in 10 years or 100 years? Nobody knows that.
No, but we can predict what our impact will be.
I don't think
we can't
we can predict it
predict a
accurately.
meteor strike.
Wow. I mean, Trevor, do you recall, it was probably a couple of years ago when we were talking about, you know, how some people, and you still hear them from time to time, Australians saying we need a Bill of Rights.
Mm.
Yeah?
Mhm.
Yes.
Are you in favour of that, Shay?
No.
Why not? Just briefly.
Well, briefly, doesn't that mean we have to appoint judges to?
Yes, and this was Trevor's, if I understood you correctly, Trevor, you were not in favour of activist judges who, you know, because we have a parliament, we have a legislature which decides, you know, through the people we vote into parliament, they decide what our laws are going to be. It's not up to our judges to make our laws for us. And here we have an example of an activist judge who thinks he's going to twist the arm of the government who make the laws and force them to do his bidding.
Can I actually
He's an activist
just
judge.
clarify my reasons?
Okay.
Because in relation to a Bill of Rights, what that was, that when you're drafting a Bill of Rights, they naturally have to be quite broad. You have the right to freedom of speech, you have the right to association, you have the right to not be vilified. And you by their nature, had to have quite broad brush notions that would compete against other notions, and that there would be a big crossover that you would then be relying on judges to discern where the crossover points met.
And it becomes a legal picnic.
And that was where I said, no, you need, that's too much leeway for judges to be making up the laws in that situation.
Exactly.
Yep.
So we should leave it to the parliament to make the laws.
But that doesn't mean that judges can't make laws.
Well, they should enforce the law, surely, rather than make it up.
That's what he's doing.
Well, there's two sources of law,
No,
Paul.
he's not. He's making it up.
But Paul, there's two sources of law generally.
Yeah.
We have our parliaments pass legislation that says in the event of A, B and C, then X, Y, Z results. And we have a law that is written down and says that. But we have laws of negligence that are not written down in statute. They are developed by case law over time, where if you have a soft drink bottle manufacturing business and somehow a snail gets into the bottle and somebody drinks from the bottle and the bottle's a dark colour so they can't see it and they ingest the snail and they get sick, then you will be responsible for the damages because it's foreseeable that this could happen. So, so laws are made by judges in the common law.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And this is actually deriving straight out of that
Do you
common
think?
law duty of care, because it's saying, the phrasing of it is all about, I'll just come back to the case here where it says, coherence, control, vulnerability and reliance all assume special relevance in an assessment of whether a novel duty of care should be recognised. And that's what this is a novel duty of care. This is taking that negligence and applying it to a minister making a decision. And when it comes to negligence normally, the way they look at it is, was it reasonably foreseeable that if you did that thing, you might have injured somebody and caused that possible injury? And so reasonable foreseeability strongly favours the recognition of a duty of care. In totality, in my view, the relations between the minister and the children answer the criterion for the intervention by the law of negligence. So it's an expansion of the law of negligence is what has happened here. It's an extraordinary case. And if you're still listening, warehouse guy, whatever you've called yourself, as a young lawyer, you appreciate this case is a big one. So a reasonable minister for the environment ought to have the children in contemplation when facilitating the emission of 100, I think, megatons of CO2 into the Earth's atmosphere. It follows that the applicants have established that the minister has a duty to take reasonable care to avoid causing personal injury to the children when deciding under this Act to approve or not approve the extension project. That is a fascinating case. So, interesting one, that one. See if it's appealed or where it ends up. But
extraordinary. But I think it's an example of an activist judge who seems to think he has some sort of power to influence.
The coal mine people didn't respond that way.
How did they respond?
They were like, yeah, fine. Minister's got a duty of care. Fine. They didn't serve the injunction. We're still good.
They might have been keeping their powder dry.
They claimed it as a victory, but it was because they didn't get the injunction.
That's right.
But it was on a technicality because he was just waiting to see whether the minister was more like. Let me just see.
How far over the minister would bend.
The applicants have not satisfied the court that it is probable that the minister will breach the duty of care in making her decision. They have not satisfied the court that they will have no further opportunity to apply for injunctive relief. I think what he's getting at is if she decides to allow the mine, come and see me. It's kind of what reading between the lines there. So it's not good for the mining groups at all.
Good.
Yeah, they were claiming it as a victory in much the same way that Christian Porter was claiming his defamation case was a victory. That's sort of the most hollow of victories.
The next question is whether common citizens have a duty of care not to infect their fellow citizens.
Well, there was that case of the guy with AIDS from New Zealand who was a professional dancer, and he had AIDS and he had unprotected sex with people, and he was, well, there was actually a crime of, he was done for a crime, but
he did in fact infect people.
Yes, well, and he could clearly have been done for a form of a tort of negligence for having unprotected sex when he knew he had AIDS. So
because he caused real harm to those people.
Yeah. So if you knew you had COVID-19
and then
you
travelled up from Melbourne
and
to
you went into a
Coolangatta.
nursing home and purposefully sneezed all over the kitchen utensils just prior to a meal, you it could be an action against you.
Why stop there? Go out into the wards and sneeze all over the people.
Or if you drove up through country New South
And why
Wales
not?
with active COVID symptoms.
That's where it gets more difficult, doesn't it? Yes, but yes. So yeah. Okay. How are we going for time? Still good. You're not in danger of the Shark Tank at all tonight, shall you? Dark emu. We've talked about dark emu in the past, and this is where we lose a few of our lefty friends here. And this is one where I'm actually on your side on this one, Paul, to a large extent. So, Dark Emu, of course, by Bruce Pascoe, basically painting a picture of our Indigenous brothers being much more of an agricultural society than anyone else has ever claimed before. And Dark Emu was a very, very popular book and is in a children's book form, which is seemingly in a curriculum in some schools.
Yeah,
I think.
I don't know, but if any of the listeners are working teachers in the classroom, I'd be interested to know to what extent it's been adopted, because it would appear that it's it's not mandated by education departments as far as I'm aware, but it might be sort of something that individual teachers or individual schools use as a teaching resource.
So anyway,
and I have a copy at home if you'd like me to bring it in and show you.
So Bruce Pascoe is
Yes.
Has a position at University of Melbourne.
Yes.
And Paul, you wrote, can I quote you or not?
Go ahead.
So when one of our Australia's premier universities creates an academic position for a person to research and presumably to teach on a field of enterprise that simply didn't exist until the person appointed, a minor writer, successfully published a book about something that genuine experts, real anthropologists, say was not actually a real thing, after the intellectual left, as well as left-leaning journalists, fall over themselves to praise it, you don't think anything is amiss, because you were claiming something's amiss with
academia.
With our academia. So, anyone who still doubts our universities are increasingly intellectually corrupted by woke ideas and social justice politics should look no further than Pascoe's appointment.
Yes.
You're right.
So he's a professor now, right?
Right.
Do you know
I
what
don't know if it's professor, but is it professor or was he appointed as some other role?
I saw him referred to as professor, but I don't know if that's the term they use. Do you know what his academic qualifications are? I mean, they've given him a chair.
What are they?
Virtually. He's got a Bachelor of Education to teach school as a school teacher. That's it. That's his sum total academic qualifications. He was a school teacher and he did a Bachelor of Education. That's it. And then after that, he started his own little publishing company, apparently, with his wife. And he's written and published a number of books by himself and by other people. But, real professional anthropologists have been working with Indigenous Australians for well over 100 years, and none of them have ever found evidence of sedentary agriculture. And suddenly, out of the blue, Pascoe comes along and says, oh yeah, there's this, and there's this. And we devoted most of a program to this book, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
When was it? A couple of years ago or so.
Yeah.
And, professional anthropologists have never, ever come across the sort of stuff that he claims was happening. And these are not people who were hostile to Indigenous people. A lot of them basically dedicated their professional lives to studying these people. And if they'd been sedentary agriculturalists, somebody would have noticed before this school teacher came along and made up this.
So I think, Paul, you probably sent to me this article from, I think it was the Sydney Morning Herald.
There was one, yes.
Which was about this quite distinguished academic Sutton and this other archaeologist, Karen Walsh, who basically wrote a book which has debunked Dark Emu.
Yeah, and I haven't read it, and I don't think any of us have read it, so we don't know what's in it.
No, but the article gives a bit of a summary of it, and I'll go into it now. But before I do, so this book, which debunks Dark Emu mercilessly, you would agree?
I don't know, because I haven't read it.
Oh,
I
but
don't
you read
think
the excerpts.
mercilessly.
I read the article,
it's
but I
quite
haven't read the book,
Yeah,
so
but-
I don't know
okay, but
whether it was merciless or kind.
Well, it's quite scathing.
Quite scathing seems to be reflected in the Sydney Morning Herald article.
Yeah, and debunks Dark Emu.
Yeah. And
Unless this article totally misrepresents the book.
I
The
don't
book
think
really,
it debunked it, but I think it discredited a lot of the views that it put.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
I
it
quickly
debunked.
listened to
Yeah, absolutely.
an interview of the guy who wrote it, and he said that there was some evidence of agricultural in Torres Strait Islands, but that as far as Arnhem Land was concerned, there was no evidence.
Of course, the Torres
And-
Strait Islanders are ethnically different. You know that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right?
So
Yes,
they
I do
would-
understand
They would
that.
grow tubers and things
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
Which,
But to say there's absolutely no evidence of these
But then-
ancient histories.
no, but they're not the Aboriginal people that Pascoe is talking about. In fact, Pascoe,
Well, he went on to say that the Aboriginal people did trade with the Torres Strait Islanders for their agriculture. So it's not like they didn't know. But anyway, proceed.
and yet, so they were aware of Torres Strait Islanders having agriculture, and yet the Aboriginal people on the mainland never adopted it. Never.
if I
The
can
only
just-
point I just want to quickly make is just that it seems like an obviously great appointment, because this is a place where it doesn't say in the article that he's actually going to go on to teach. It says they're going to work with other researchers to discredit it. We adopt a lot of social theories that actually never get proven. By him being at a Melbourne university, there's a really good chance that everything that he's put forward is going to be totally disproved.
Why would they
And then
waste
you can
money
be-
paying
and then
this
you can
guy?
be, because there's an opportunity for inclusivity and conversations around better management of the land, which is topical.
What's it got to do with inclusivity?
Well, he's Aboriginal.
No, he
So,
isn't. That's
isn't
been
he?
debunked too.
Oh,
No, well, he
right.
He
claims,
claims
he
to
is,
be,
and
but a
others
lot of other
disagree.
Aborigines say, no way is he an Aborigine.
Yeah, but- well,
And some quite prominent ones. In fact, one, a woman called Cashman, who's a lawyer, an Aboriginal lawyer, she took a case against him, didn't she? With the, what was it? I think it was Section 19. Is it 19C or 17C? You know, the one that they got Bolt on for people profit. Oh no, it was something about
vilification or
people
something.
profiting from claiming to be Indigenous when they weren't.
I don't,
And this Josephine Cashman, her name is, and I've seen her a number of times on the ABC on chat shows. She took a case against this guy, saying he's not an Aborigine and he's claiming to be one, and he's trying to get some benefit from it. But the AFP dropped the case because they said they didn't really have any evidence.
I'll just read a bit about what this article says about the book. So, who is Sutton? I haven't got his first name here, but he's written or contributed to 20 books and about 200 anthropology and linguistic papers. He has been an expert anthropological researcher in 87 Aboriginal land claims since 1979. When barrister Ron Caston presented the landmark Wick case to the High Court in 1996, he brandished a 1,000-page anthropological report entitled ACK, the Wick word for homeland, written by Sutton and others, which he said would be the foundation of the argument. The other writer of this book, Karen Walsh's work in archaeology over 35 years has included a decade at Cunalda Cave, a rich heritage site that has offered a glimpse of Aboriginal life on the Nullarbor Plain during the Pleistocene period. Okay.
Pleistocene.
Anyway, on the face of it, some
More like
reasonable
Pleistocene.
credentials of these people who have written the book.
And interesting, can I just add one thing before you go on? So that guy, Sutton, was a linguist. And I think I read somewhere he made the point that if Indigenous people had been sedentary agriculturalists, they would have had vocabulary for all those things. And he said they don't have it.
Yes. Brahman already in the chat room says, I haven't read the book either, but it's important to note that there are limitations to the expertise of authors, e.g. Peter Sutton's knowledge as an anthropologist is limited to the Wick people of Cape York. He doesn't appear to know a lot about Indigenous land and food management practices in other parts of Australia. Good point.
I don't think it's a good point, frankly.
I think it's a good point.
No, look, if you're an anthropologist and your field is Indigenous Australians,
Then
you're going to be
everything's a mystery.
You're going to be reading. You're going to be reading, and you're probably going to have a curiosity about Aborigines all over the continent, and you would know something about them. You don't.
Let me
just,
play
Yes, but he also claimed.
Let me play devil's advocate here.
All right.
You're very keen on this to say that the science is settled.
Yeah.
No, but I have books on
But you are
Indigenous history.
I'm
and
playing
things.
devil's advocate here. You're very keen to say that the science is settled on this. Yet on other discussion topics we have, you're very keen to say, oh, well, we don't know, Trevor. We don't know. It's possible. We don't know. We can't be sure. As more evidence comes out, we might find more.
We couldn't
Can
foresee it.
Can I pull you up
Who
on
has
that?
a crystal ball, after all?
I haven't used the word science, have I, in this discussion about this guy?
No,
because when I did a
I didn't
course
say you did.
when
I'm
I
saying
did,
it's your
no,
argument,
you're saying
but-
no. Well, it's not my argument because anthropology is not science, and I clearly remember my anthropology teacher at university, even though it's called a social science.
Right.
We had one lesson where the anthropology lecturer put the question to us. He said, "Is this science?" And we had a big discussion. And at the end of the lesson, we all came to the conclusion that no, it's not really a science. It's a humanities thing. It's a bit like history, where you go around and you collect information, on people. In the case of anthropology, but it's a matter of logic. It's not science. It's not something you can measure in a laboratory. So
Did
technically,
your lecturer agree?
Okay. Well, Paul,
he told us he didn't think it was science.
but Paul, the argument would still be that you're very keen to say that our knowledge and our understanding on this topic is secure and
pretty
settled.
Secure. It's
Yet-
pretty secure
yet
after
on other
more
t-
than a century of work. It's pretty.
On other topics, you're quite keen to often say, we don't know how the virus is transmitted. We don't know these things. The science is still
And
developing.
I was right, because in Melbourne now they're discovering new means of transmission that they weren't aware of the virus.
So my point is, you're very keen to say on this one that it's clear that Dark Emu's wrong,
Yes,
and these
very
guys are
clear.
right,
Very clear.
and ironclad. Where on other issues, you're prepared to say we don't know yet what the final answer will be.
So what?
that's-
What's the connection? What's the connection between science and anthropology? I don't see how you can make a clear link.
Okay, if you can't see it, I won't belay the point.
No, I think you're just trying to put something on me and say that I'm not consistent, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's the point. Thank you.
I get your point, but I don't agree with you.
Right.
I mean,
It's
I've
just
been
that-
I've been reading about Aborigines for many, many years, and I have several books in my collection. And I've, it's something that
But people have been reading
I'm
about
curious about.
viruses for many years, and they have lots of books in their collection. And you would say to them, "We still don't know what might happen or what is happening. We still don't know." So to those people, you're prepared to say you can't be sure. Yet when it comes to your own position on this, you can say you are very sure.
everything I've read about COVID over the last year and whatever has been conflicting opinions. So clearly even the scientists are not sure.
Right.
That's not just my opinion. That's coming from them. That's coming from epidemiologists who don't all agree. So clearly that's not my assumption. But on this is something that I have taken more of an interest in. And I did a whole semester-long course on Indigenous peoples of the world, not just Australians, at the University of Queensland. And I learned a lot about Indigenous people around the world in that course. It was very, very informative. And as I said, I have several books on Indigenous Australians in my collection.
I'm just playing devil's advocate on this one because ultimately you are correct that Dark Emu is an exaggeration of nonsense. But I just wanted to quiz you on that particular point in your certainty in this regard.
I don't know nonsense. It's an exaggeration of the facts.
It's not even facts, Joe.
Let me read some. Let me just
Yeah.
let me just read some of this part anyway. So he was so this is Sutton. Nothing in Sutton's 50 years of research with senior Aboriginal people suggested to him that Pascoe was right. He was disturbed that Pascoe's description of Aboriginal life were based on, and to his mind took liberties with, the journals of blow-through European explorers, men who were ignorant of the languages and cultures of those they met, rather than Aboriginal people whose knowledge has been recorded for the past 100 years at least. He was stunned that the book was riddled with errors of fact, selective quotations, selective use of evidence, and exaggeration of weak evidence, including the suggestion Aboriginal people have occupied Australia for 120,000 years. And he was outraged that school curricula were being changed to conform with the dark emu narrative, embracing Pascoe's descriptions of early agricultural society. More than anything, he felt that Pascoe had done the old people, as Sutton refers to them, a monumental disservice, resurrecting long discredited ideas of social evolutionism that placed hunter-gatherers lower on the evolutionary scale than farmers. To Sutton, it was a rebirthing of the colonial philosophy used to justify Aboriginal dispossession in the first place, that people who lived lightly on the land had no claim to it, that farmers were more deserving of dignity and respect than hunter-gatherers. I will agree with him on that point in that Pascoe does he does beat up the agricultural credentials of Indigenous people, and in doing so, he does refer to mere hunter-gatherers, and they were more than that. He is disparaging of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle as being less than the agricultural lifestyle, and that is a picture that Pascoe paints in that. And Pascoe does sort of skite that he used Western explorers' accounts of their journeys because he said nobody would believe the Indigenous accounts. But Sutton makes a good point that, well, Indigenous accounts are worth more in this matter than a Western traveller.
Sutton appears to have pretty good knowledge of Indigenous accounts because he speaks their languages.
Yeah. The world of 1788 that Pascoe created in Dark Emu, Sutton says, was a reimagination, not a discovery. Sutton and Walsh write that the old people in 1788 were neither because they had developed ways of managing and benefiting from their landscape that went beyond just hunting and just gathering, but did not involve gardening or farming. They frequently used slow-burning fires to make their landscapes more livable, and on the other hand, they did not cut down bush to clear the land, plough and hoe the soil in preparation for planting, or then sow stored seed or tubers or rootstock in gardens or in fields. So he says, okay, they made changes to the landscape, but it fell short of being agricultural.
What they sometimes refer to as fire stick farming.
Yes.
Which is not really farming as we understand it.
Yes. There's a section here where it discredits Pascoe's interpretation of what Thomas Mitchell wrote. And the part that I found interesting was it kind of made the point that they had observed agriculture in the Torres Strait Islands and they really didn't want to adopt agriculture because they didn't see it as being part of their culture, according to Sutton. So it was a deliberate maintaining of a hunter-gatherer lifestyle for cultural reasons is how Sutton described why they didn't take up agriculture.
And maybe even what we might call spiritual reasons.
Yes, yeah. So all that was interesting. And it goes into quite detail and here's my point, Paul. Just coming back to your quote in your email where you said, anyone who still doubts our universities are increasingly intellectually corrupted by woke ideas and social justice politics should look at this. And it's the appointment of Pascoe.
Yeah.
But the publisher of this book, which criticises Pascoe, was the same university.
So what?
Well, the point is a university is on the one hand employing Pascoe in position, but on the other hand, it is actually printing and publishing a book by authors which gives the contrary opinion.
It's a separate department, though. It's the Melbourne University Publishing or University of Melbourne Publishing or whatever they call the company.
It's part of the university.
Yes, but it's a separate section.
It's on the right.
When you're claiming that a university has fallen into a woke spiral of then
it's just one example, one among many. If we went looking, we would find a lot.
The counter example is that the same university published a very strong counter-argument.
Yes, I'm not suggesting that there are no good intellectuals or there is no good intellectual endeavour taking place in our universities. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is there are a lot of flaky ideas being taken up by our universities, and this is one very good example of a very flaky writer who, because he published a book and a lot of people thought, oh, this is great, isn't it? This elevates the Indigenous people and makes them feel better about themselves. I saw it when it was first came out. I used to be in the habit of watching the ABC breakfast program on TV, and they had him on that when it was first published, and they gushed and fawned all over him, and it was embarrassing because, you know, he was this fake, this fraud, and the ABC was, you know, had him on the program like he was some kind of big deal, you know, and I thought, oh my God, you know, it's just one example, and there are others. There are, you know, lots in the humanities departments especially.
Yeah, well, I just think it's to the credit of the university that they've actually published a book that is totally contrary to
They're
that.
not all bad. I'm not suggesting there's nothing good coming out of our university. I'm just suggesting.
But read it again, what you are suggesting.
Anyone who still doubts our universities are increasingly intellectually corrupted by woke ideas and social justice politics should look at this.
Yes, increasingly does not mean completely.
Mm.
It means it's a trend and it's happening.
Yeah.
And I think that it is.
Well, there's always disagreement in academia.
And yet we agree that Pascoe's book is rubbish.
Yeah, ultimately. Well, you know, the interesting thing about Pascoe's book is it's actually the most interesting parts of it were lifted from this thesis by a guy called Gittins. And that is a true scholarly work, and anyone interested in the topic should read that book. It costs you $120, dear listener, and I've got to get it back from my friend Noel, who borrowed it from me. So
you have it?
Yes.
Oh.
So, and that is a fully scholarly piece, and Pascoe actually got a lot of his stuff from that. And the family of that guy who wrote that other book are sort of angry with Pascoe because they say, hang on a minute, this is really what our son did. He died early, and I think suicide, I'm not sure. But
so Pascoe borrowed it in a sense.
He's acknowledged in the footnotes,
but
it's
okay.
sort of like it's a very dry, scholarly, hard to read book, the $120 one, and Pascoe has given it a colourful interpretation and sold lots of copies as a result. So, yeah.
And he's laughing all the way to the bank.
So anyway, that was that one. Let me just pick my way through some of the other topics here because it's been a while, and I'll just see which one.
The audience has requested Friendly Geordies.
Yes, Friendly Geordies. So if you're not, are you aware of Friendly Geordies at all, Paul?
It's a activist group, isn't it, who give the coalition politicians a hard time or something.
Yeah, it's a YouTube. Jordan Shanks and a group of friends have this Friendly Geordies podcast YouTube channel.
So-called comedian.
And
not very funny.
And anyway, they're young people in their 20s who are politically active. Have you listened to it at all?
Mark too? I haven't. But
Yes.
I listen to it.
Yeah, I do.
A reasonable amount.
Oh, really?
And, yes.
Friendly Geordies?
Yes.
Oh, I've only seen that one video that he made in the bathtub of the Barilara.
John Barilara.
Yeah. I've seen that one.
Right.
I didn't think it was very funny, I have to say. I thought it was really juvenile and stupid. But
anyway, they he's on the left, of course, so he's attacking the right, but he's also attacking the media very often and their poor form in taking on politicians. And so he's made a big deal about John Barilara, who I think is the Deputy Premier in New South Wales.
He's the leader of the Nationals.
Which would probably make him the Deputy, I think.
Yes, I think it does, yeah.
And anyway, Barilara has taken a defamation action against Jordan Shanks. And so that in itself is seen as a means of trying to silence political opposition, if you will. So it's, this doesn't happen in America because of the free speech laws under their Bill of Rights in their Constitution. Does mean it's basically public figures have to cop whatever happens to them. And it would be nice to change our laws here so that public figures, the sort of Christian Porter thing couldn't happen in the United States, for example. And this John Barilaro suing for defamation of Jordan Shanks couldn't happen in the United States.
Can you not sue for defamation
It's
in
much
the United
tougher.
States?
It's as a public figure, it's much, much more difficult. So anyway, that defamation is underway. And in the lawsuit, Barilaro's address is put care of Parliament House, Canberra.
Really?
Yeah. Clearly
And
incorrect.
he's a New South Wales parliamentarian.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, the producer of the Friendly Geordies happened to have the paperwork in his backpack as he was going to uni or whatever he was doing at his arts college. And on his way home, he's walking along the street and literally sees Barilaro about to get in a car. And so he crosses the street to hand the guy the documents to basically say, well, he was going to say to him, I'm going to give you these back because the address is wrong. That's not your address. And Barilaro was on the phone and basically put his head down, got in his car as a passenger, and they drove off.
And ignored the guy.
Over and done with in a flash. And the next day, Barilaro has obviously got onto this type of police. There's a type of it's not the ordinary police. It's kind of part of a counter-terrorism squad that is part of a sort of if you're being stalked by somebody, you would be using this branch of the police.
Yeah.
And he's got them to arrest this guy at his home and dragged him off to a police station in an unmarked car, and he's been charged.
New South Wales Police?
Well, it's a funny
Or
division
AFP?
of... I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head. It's a funny division that's not your standard police. It's a sort of a squad that's plainclothes and arrested him in his home.
Fixated Persons Unit is what it's called.
Thank you.
Martin.
Fixated
What is it
persons.
called?
Fixated Persons Unit.
Oh, okay.
If you had a Hollywood celebrity who was being stalked, that would be the sort of group sort of thing. And the thing is, the video evidence, like this, these guys video everything they do. When they're on the phone talking to Barilaro or anybody, they put on a video. And so he had a full video of himself with this incident. And it's obvious a fairly innocuous incident. And the complaint against him has several errors in it based on that video and is a real exaggeration of what happened. And anyway, he's under an injunction now where he can't have anything to do with Barilaro, can't have anything to do with the Friendly Geordies media work. And it was really a case of a kind of a worrying version of a Stasi or type thing where you've criticised a leader of our parliament. We're going to bundle you off into a police car and take you off and charge you. It was a really
Sounds
nasty
like sort of things Joe would do.
Yeah, it was a really nasty incident. And just harking back to what we were saying earlier with the Biloela family, just if you start bundling people off and treating them badly, it sets a tone for your society that this is an acceptable thing to do. So that's why we need to treat people with respect if we want to be treated ourselves with respect. These things start to become commonplace. So anyway, he's got some celebrity law firm acting for him, and that will be interesting. But Barilaro should be in a huge amount of trouble, you would hope, at the end of that.
You heard about the guy in the States was being served with a lawsuit, and the guy who was serving the papers walked up to his house, saw his wife go into the garage, tried to hand the papers to her as she was getting out of the car in the garage, and he's now been sued for trespass and
okay, because he entered the house, effectively the garage. He
menacing
walked past.
behaviour or
yeah,
something
it
like
was,
that.
and again it was filmed, and it was he was trying to serve him the papers for a lawsuit.
So anyway, it was just a
bit nasty, I agree.
quite nasty, and the thought that a deputy leader could think he could do that.
Yeah, but Barilaro, he's a bit of a shaky character, isn't he? I mean, he's been...
Careful, he sues for defamation, so just
when,
be
when,
very careful.
when I say shaky, I mean, sometimes if he's on a wet floor, he might lose his footing, like any of us might.
Yes, I see what you mean.
Yes,
slippery character. Then is that what you meant?
No, what I really meant was he's had disputes with the Premier.
Yes.
With Berejiklian. He doesn't always get along with the people in his own government, that he's a deputy of. But look, I'm with you, Trevor. I don't like the idea of police bundling people into cars and driving them off because some politician is offended by what they do. I definitely don't think that's a good way
You
to
think
go.
Gough Whitlam would have said, "I remember" to him?
What's the Gough Whitlam reference here?
The National Party becoming, having been the inheritors of the Country Party.
Right.
And whether or not he was a country member.
No, you've lost me, Joe.
Apparently, Sir Winston Turnbull shouted in Parliament, "I'm a country member." "I remember," said Whitlam.
Who's Winston Turnbull?
Right.
Was a member of the Country Party.
Really?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So Gough Whitlam to "I'm a country member" said, "I remember."
Oh, okay. Yes, okay.
I don't get it. Can you fill me
Split the
in?
word. I'm a... Okay, just go slowly. Country member. Yeah, okay, Joe. No wonder we all missed that the first time. Your joke at the beginning was by far the best.
Right,
I forget what it was, but that was... You've gone downhill since then.
It happens.
But, we have things like Witness K, Bernard Colliery, secret trials, these sorts of things...
Authoritarian
tendencies.
Authoritarianism is bad for us.
Indeed.
And
we need to stand up when it occurs.
I agree, Trevor. That's what I've been trying to encourage you to do.
Well, I'm the one... see,
That's what I was
I'm
saying. I
the
was
one
considering your
arguing-
plight.
I'm the
Was
one-
anyone going to bail him off in a police car if he keeps this?
I'm the one arguing
Satanism
against true authoritarianism.
No, I'm the one arguing against true
No, 'cause
authoritarianism.
you argue
I'm
against the
Spartacus.
duly elected Premier of Victoria.
He is an authoritarian.
You call him authoritarian?
Yes.
He's
He
duly-
declared it's an emergency when there was a new virus in the
He's
community.
a duly elected Premier. Meanwhile,
Not elected to become a dictator.
in an open democratic system. Meanwhile, when we've got things like Julian Assange, Witness K, Bernard Colliery, issues like that, where we need to be angrier, and we're not as a community. And hence, that's why guys like Barilaro think they can do what they do. Yeah. There we go.
I was reading a thing about the Australian spies and how there is no oversight. So in the US, the US military, the secret agencies, there is a Senate oversight committee that actually has control. They have to report back over what they've done, where the money has been spent. And they're saying in Australia there isn't parliamentary oversight.
Really?
And therefore
Over
that
ASIO and, the intelligence bodies?
they report back directly to the cabinet, but there is no bipartisan oversight committee.
Even in the Senate estimates, they don't have to answer questions?
I think it disappears into a black hole.
Yeah. I dare say they wouldn't be asking them questions about things that might compromise operations, but they'd be...
So in the US, there's actually a separate committee that is bipartisan that get to see the secret stuff, and it's not asked publicly in Parliament, but there is oversight from both parties.
Interesting. I don't know how much oversight there is in the Australian government over that. Do you? I mean,
there was a
apart
thing
from
with
what Joe said.
Rex Patrick was complaining about some laws that were passed. There's been a lot of different laws passed recently that give a lot of power to our secret services, and they're quite unaccountable, and it's all done in the name of counter-terrorism to keep us safe.
Yeah.
And
it sounds like COVID.
It's too much in that regard. So at least with COVID, we know what's going on. They tell us.
But
you
they
can stay home.
exaggerate everything.
But there's things happening there that we just don't even hear about. So, all right. Well, I reckon we've just about come to the end. No, actually, I have to say, patrons. How about being a patron? We've got fantastic people who donate some money to the show to help cover the costs. And, dear listener, I subscribe to different News Corp publications, the Australian, the Courier Mail. Crikey is really good. I'm very happy with my Crikey subscription, getting lots of stuff from that. Other...
Spectator? Have you got a subscription to Spectator yet?
I had Spectator, but I
You dropped it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I did. I had it for a while just so I could argue with you about things, but I could only handle that for so long. Anyway, there's the cost of the website, cost of these bits and pieces. So if you contribute some money, that's great, because I can tell you there's not a lot left over at the end of the day. And anyway, thank you to the patrons, starting from the most recent. I think Rick O, Greg P, Shannon L, also Warehouse Man Tom, good on you. Shannon Legg, Liam Healy, Don Tuvey, Daniel Flanagan, Matt Dwyer, Sue Cribb, James Leone, Branwyn Wayne, David Hamby, Yvonne, Virgil, P. Slizzle, Craig Ball, Shane Ingram, Yam Yam Blue, Andrew Jackson, David Copley. David, see you in a few weeks. Got a really interesting story to tell you about. My brother had his school reunion last weekend. He was a year above me, and the reunion was delayed because of COVID. So it was 41 years. And he was at his school reunion, and he was just the year above me. And all these guys kept coming up to him and going, "What is your brother doing with this Satanism stuff?"
Oh.
Because the article in the Courier Mail quotes me as being St. James's old boy. And then one of the Christian brothers, Brother Tynan, former principal of St. James, went up to Glenn twice during the day and said,
What's happened to you?
I don't understand why he would do something like that.
That's hilarious.
So my 40th reunion is coming up in a couple of weeks' time.
Are you wearing your Noosa Temple T-shirt?
I think I'll have to now. and I'm going to have to explain myself to the Christian brothers who turn up at the school. Yeah. So anyway, David Coatley, schoolmate, you'll have to stand up for me, David, and explain to people that I'm not completely nuts with what I'm doing. Graham Hannigan, yet another Pinker fan. John in Dire Straits, Donnie Darko, Camille, Tom Doolan, Paul Waper. Paul, very generous donation. I had lunch with Paul a few weeks ago. We've got a lot of beer and a lot of spirits to get through.
Thanks for the beer,
that was
Paul.
Very generous, Paul. Thank you very much again. And Alexander Allen, Clinton Riggs, Matthew, Craig S., Glenn Bell, Professor Dr. Dentist, Adam Priest, Melinda, Murray Waper, Andy Dowling, Captain Doomsday, Peter Gillespie, Gavin S., Harry Watson, Daniel Curtin, Liam McMahon. Congratulations on your wedding, Liam. Dominic Damassi, Matic Man, Palais, Bronwyn. Thank you for your comments, as always, Bronwyn. Kane, Jimmy Spud, Tony Wald, Steve Shinners, Alison C., Ayame, Wayno, Landon Hardbottom, Craig Gladsby, Shane Louise, and Sean Hudrell. Janelle Louise and Sean Hadrell. And also some people who don't like to use Patreon but do it through PayPal would be Mr. Anderson, Matt Mann, Mr. T, Paul Evans, Wayne Seaman, and Jared Obrad, Puscorica, Darren Giddens, Watley, Greg Clark, and Dave S. from Cairns. Thank you to all of those people. Next week, I'm going to do a little book review on, we talked about morality before, and this book examines morality, basically saying there's sort of conflicting ways of looking at morals. One would be the utilitarian approach, maximising human flourishing for the most number of people, versus the libertarian approach, which is maximising individual freedom of choice. And there's lots of really good case examples of the flaws that crop up when you are using those theories. And he eventually then recommends something which comes out of Aristotle, if you like, which is at the end of the day, you want a polis or a society that is just and people get what they deserve, and you have to make a judgment call at the end of the day. Sometimes there's just a judgment involved of something's good or something's bad. And anyway, that'll be next week, book review.
Can you give us a heads up of the title?
is it this one? Justice. What's the right thing to do? I think was. I don't know if it's this one or the other one. Yeah, Justice. What's the right thing to do? Michael Sandel.
Okay.
So anyway, that'll be next week. I think I'd like to do a book review every second week and our panel in the alternate weeks. So, right, dear listener.
Not very inclusive, is he?
Yeah. Well, we need to speak about some big ideas as well. So,
Yes.
some meta concepts.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be back next week.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
It's a good night from him.